Reports of intensified bombing across Gaza and Palestine continues to be received, however, and this as the International Court of Justice in The Hague begins 2 days of proceedings later this morning on the application that was filed by South Africa in December against Israel's alleged violations of its obligations under the 1948 Genocide Convention. Now, this follows Israel's war in Gaza, resulting in more than 22,000 Palestinian deaths since Hamas launched an attack on Israel on the 7th of October last year, where more than 1,200 people were killed and about 200 kidnapped. Now, South Africa will request the world's highest court to order Israel to adhere to a ceasefire, to take measures to prevent a genocide and allow humanitarian aid to reach Palestine. So to talk more about the latest developments, the role of the ICJ, and also perhaps what to expect, we joined once again by Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC's correspondent in the United States. But of course, he is back home on home soil to visit. And good to have you once again, Sherwin.
Sakina, good to be with you.
So here we are again, and the day has finally arrived. So there seems to be great interest, and maybe we can start by looking at those who have joined this application now, Sherwin, just to see who has come over and said, okay, South Africa's brought this application and we think we should support it, because I think I saw Turkey, Jordan, Maldives, and quite a number of organizations as well.
I think the big bloc that's supporting is the Organization of Islamic Community. The OIC has rendered, I think, their 50-plus member states in support of this. I think Malaysia, Indonesia, and a few others. But it certainly isn't an overwhelming number of member states at the United Nations, 193 of them, that have come out to put their sort of thumb on the scale here. But let me tell you, there's a great deal of interest in this case around the world. The Gaza situation, the conflict in Gaza has dominated geopolitics, particularly at places like the United Nations. The Security Council, the General Assembly is very much ventilating this issue, and what they will be looking to is clarity from the International Court of Justice here in terms of whether Israel is in violation of the prescriptions of the Genocide Convention, to which it has subscribed to. Israel, of course, was one of the first countries in 1948 to become a signatory to the Convention on Genocide. South Africa subsequently also signed, I think, in 1951. So they are at either sides of a debate here as to whether Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. South Africa says Israel is in violation of the convention, the treaty it has signed up to. Israel is saying, hang on, we're not doing that. And this is what is going to be ventilated between the 15 ICJ judges plus the 2 ad hoc judges, one from Israel, one from South Africa, Dikgang Motseneke, the former Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court. And this is the process that will play itself out live on South African television and around the world today.
So that's an interesting one, the composition of the bench, because if I look at, some of the sentiments being expressed on social media, for example, people seem to harbor this view that there won't be any sort of unbiased, application of the law, given that perhaps there may be strings pulled behind the scenes or, people's sentiments around this. So can we talk about that in terms of, exactly how that bench is constituted and its independence?
The judges of the International Court of Justice are elected by both the Security Council and in tandem with the General Assembly. And I think we know this now because South African legal scholar Professor Adhere was just months ago elected to serve on that bench, and his 9-year term will start in February, so he's not part of this case. So essentially the member states of the international community at the United Nations vote for these judges. They come from different countries. And what we did see, it's an interesting question, because what we did see in the Russia-Ukraine case, that the ICJ produced an advisory opinion in 2022, the Russian judge abstained and the Chinese judge abstained, while the broad consensus was that Russia was in violation of international law and needed to stop its military action in Ukraine. So it's an interesting formulation. One doesn't quite know how these independent judges are going to rule, but essentially the purview of the court is to settle disputes between member states of the United Nations, between states parties, particularly two parties that find themselves on either side of a treaty that is essentially international law, and they are now going to have to produce clarity on whether there's a violation of that international law.
So to that point, what does South Africa have to prove? Because there are rules in that convention that actually state what constitutes genocide. So let's look at that.
So let me read you one paragraph from the Genocide Convention of 1948. It says the following: the 1948 Genocide Convention is an international treaty that binds the 153 states that are party to it, including Israel and South Africa. The convention explicitly gives the ICJ jurisdiction over disputes regarding its implementation. The Genocide Convention defines genocide as acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. So that racial, ethnic group are the Palestinian people in this instance, and South Africa has to now prove that Israel's actions are being committed with the intent to destroy. The intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic or racial and religious group. And so what is South Africa going to point to? It is going to point to the indiscriminate bombing that they believe has been indiscriminate. Israel will say that these are precision strikes, that Hamas is using humans as human shields, but that they take great care to avoid such casualties because they inform people to move from certain areas where they're about to bomb. South Africa is going to argue, but that's not good enough. That doesn't exonerate you from your obligations under international law, because there are instances where people have been told to move to the south in Gaza when those convoys have then been bombed. They will look at the collapsing health system in Gaza, where 80% of the population has been displaced, where the trauma levels in these hospitals are exacerbating and overwhelming the ability of physicians, of nurses, of people in those hospitals to treat patients, the lack of medical supplies, humanitarian aid getting into Gaza, the fact that the United Nations itself has warned that starvation is rampant in Gaza, that famine is looming in Gaza, and that there has been wanton destruction of Gaza's civilian infrastructure, including people's homes. So if you are destroying people's homes, they talk about 60 to 70% of residential blocks in Gaza having been destroyed. The fact that bodies are still lying under rubble and inaccessible because you need big equipment to move some of those things. South Africa is going to point to that as intent, to destroy the ethnic, religious, minority that are the Palestinian people in that area.
And as you say, Israel, of course, will make their counter-argument tomorrow. But I was wondering, Sherwin, with regard to South Africa's case, if we think back to the Secretary General invoking Article 99, does something like that actually strengthen South Africa's case?
It does, in a sense, that these are the tools that diplomats and bureaucrats are able to use. But the point is, does strengthening the case matter if implementation is going to still be lacking, right? So they will point to that. They will point to the statements of UN officials, the efforts that have been extraordinary from the Secretary General. I mean, the last time Article 99 was invoked, I think, was on the Lebanese war in the late 1980s. So it has taken decades for him to use that tool. And I asked the Secretary General spokesperson at the time, what does it matter that he's trying to raise this issue in the Council when it has already been taken up by the Council? And they said, well, we have to deploy every diplomatic tool in our toolbox. So that will bolster the case, but South Africa is going to make very specific arguments as it relates not to Article 99 or what UN officials have said, but what the Convention on Genocide says and whether Israel is in violation of that.
So, and I think this is the crux for many people, this case, will take quite a while to be brought to a conclusion. However, in the interim, what sort of relief is it that can be brought about that would perhaps see a sort of ceasefire,
right,
hopefully, in Gaza?
So the South Africans have asked specifically for provisional measures because they understand that this is a long process that will have to be studied by the 15+2 justices, and that could take months, years, possibly. And so they've asked for provisional measures to say, but the current situation cannot wait that long. So, people are dying every day. Let's stop that. So there might be a provisional decision going either in South Africa's favor or not that could ask or certainly demand that the Israeli Defense Forces military action in Gaza stop in the interim while they ventilate the broader questions here. But we have these requests already, right? We have requests from the General Assembly. 155 plus members voted in the General Assembly demanding an immediate ceasefire, demanding that the hostages in Israel, being held in Gaza, be released. Let's not forget that there's still 130 plus Israeli hostages that are being held. So those demands have been made. The Security Council has asked for certain things in terms of humanitarian relief, but it hasn't actually matched the demand. The scale of humanitarian aid isn't at the level that United Nations and humanitarian agencies need to meet the demands on the ground. So whether you get a decision or not, implementation is going to be key, and that's the big question that the ICJ is not going to be able to answer. They will say, yes, Israel is in violation, Israel must stop, but then Israel essentially is going to have to decide whether to comply or not. And Israel is a party to this convention. It has signed up to the binding nature of this international treaty called the Genocide Convention. So it's showing up in court. It's produced its own defense team. It's unlike the Russians that didn't show up and just sent a statement to the court. They are there because they are party to this convention. So it's a different scenario.
And just a final one, it's obviously going to be quite an intense case, quite difficult to prove. But of course, looking at some individual utterances by officials of Israel, can that be attributed to the Israeli government overall?
Absolutely. These are senior Israeli officials. The Prime Minister is the head, essentially the commander-in-chief of the Israeli Defense Force. Several ministers have made statements about, what they want to see happening in Gaza. I don't have the specifics, and I don't want to summarize what they've said, because one has to be very specific here. But there have been statements, and the South Africans have indicated in their 84-page document before the court that they intend to use Israel officials' words against them. So that's also going to play out. But let's not undermine what the Israelis themselves will be seeking to do in this case. They will point to South Africa's hypocrisy, quote unquote. They will point to the ability of former Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir to leave South Africa when South Africa had obligations under the Rome Statute to arrest the indicted president.
But what does that have to do with genocide being perpetrated in Gaza?
I'm just talking about what they're going to use as their defense. Who is bringing this case that we were attacked first? Remember, the atrocity was an atrocity crime perpetrated against Israel. The right to self-defense. You will hear things around proportionality. You will hear things around collective punishment. All these are international legal terms that are going to be ventilated before the 17 justices later today.
I suppose, as you said earlier, use every tool at your disposal in your legal box. That's what we're going to see. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, he's going to be around because he's going to have to sit around here, help us watch, unpack what's happening in The Hague. Sherwin Bryce-Pease is, of course, SABC News US Correspondent, talking to us about what we can expect in today's International Court of Justice as it begins its 2 days of hearings on South Africa's application against Israel for alleged violations and under its obligations under the 1948 Genocide Convention.